All right, let's dive in. We're taking a deep dive today into some source material you shared, specifically this article, Musk, Epstein, and the Forbidden Truths by Larken Rose.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think, is how it uses this one specific claim Elon Musk made. It used that as a jumping off point, really,
Right.
to look at something much bigger. Like, how does information, truth, power, how do these things actually work together in public?
Exactly. So our mission here really is just to unpack what this article is getting at, explore its main ideas, and try to understand what it's suggesting about, the limits of what gets discussed, especially in politics, in the media.
Uh-huh.
And importantly, we're sticking just to what's in this source.
Right. So it starts with that specific incident. Elon Musk making a public claim suggesting Donald Trump was in the Epstein files.
Okay. And the source doesn't just see this as like typical political back and forth.
No, that's the key point the author makes. It's presented as potentially something more, like a genuine crack in a story, a narrative, that the source argues the powerful elites want to keep hidden.
So not just theater.
Not just theater, according to this analysis, maybe something that slipped out, wasn't part of the, let's say, the approved script.
Okay. And that leads the article into a critique, right,
Yeah.
about how people usually think about politics.
Yeah, it talks about tribalism or, binary thinking.
That knee-jerk my side versus their side thing.
Exactly. The source argues that mindset it blinds you.
Yeah.
Makes you ignore information if it comes from the wrong person.
Oh.
Even if it's true or complex, you just dismiss it based on who said it.
Right, without actually looking at the substance. Which then leads the source to draw this line, this distinction between, what was it, controlled opposition and genuine conflict.
Yeah, that's a big part of the argument. The idea is that a lot of mainstream political debate is controlled. It's like managed theater, giving you the feeling of opposition. But the source says, look, not everything is scripted. Sometimes something genuinely disruptive happens.
And Musk's comment about Trump and Epstein, the source puts that in the genuine disruption box, something unplanned by the powers that be, basically.
That's the interpretation offered, yes. Now, getting into the Epstein files part, this is where the article really digs into what it sees as, well, hypocrisy across the political spectrum.
Oh, so?
Well, it notes Musk's claim got huge attention. And the reason, the source argues, is because it stepped outside the usual acceptable lines of political talk.
Okay.
And it makes this specific point. Reportedly, both Democrats and Republicans tend to shy away from really digging deep into the Epstein situation, or certain parts of it anyway.
The article mentions Trump specifically, right? His silence on it, even when he maybe could have addressed it.
Yes, it notes that. And it also suggests figures on the Democratic side are similarly quiet about certain connections or implications.
So the article looks at this quietness from both sides, and what does it conclude from that?
The interpretation presented is that this widespread avoidance, this sort of careful stepping around the issue, suggests powerful people from both main parties might be implicated, or at least have strong reasons to keep a lid on it.
Okay, again, just reporting the source's view here.
Absolutely. And this ties right into another big idea in the article, the propaganda bubble.
The propaganda bubble, what does the source mean by that?
It's arguing that propaganda isn't just about spinning things or telling you what to believe. It's more fundamental. It restricts what topics are even allowed to be discussed seriously in public.
It sets the boundaries of the conversation itself.
Exactly. It determines what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. The article lists some examples of what it calls forbidden topics.
Okay, like what?
Well, according to the source, things like questioning the fundamental legitimacy of taxation. The author uses the phrase, taxation is theft, as an example of a viewpoint that's just shut out of mainstream debate. Another is questioning the whole idea of a political throne, like the basic right of a government or ruling class to exist and have power. And the third big one mentioned is the idea of widespread elite involvement in child exploitation.
So these are foundational questions that the source says are off limits.
Right. And it contrasts those with the debates we do see all the time in politics, which the source calls safe topics.
Like how much to tax.
Exactly. Or how to tweak healthcare policy. The source's point is these debates happen within the existing system. They argue about the details, but never question the basic structure itself. Like, the debate is how much tax, not should there be tax. That fundamental question is kept outside the bubble.
Got it. Now, the article also talks about Elon Musk himself, doesn't it? And well, it's not exactly praising him.
No, definitely not. It's quite critical, actually. It calls him things like a statist, a collectivist, a techno-elitist.
Why those labels?
It points to his support for things like UBI, universal basic income, and technocracy. The source sees these as showing he believes in centralized control and expert rule, which the author clearly opposes.
Okay, so pretty strong criticisms, but it's not entirely negative, is it? I thought it said something about him being complex.
Yeah, it does balance it a bit. It says, he's still a human, implying complexity, not just a caricature.
And does it find any value in what he says despite the criticisms?
It does. The source makes the point that sometimes Musk says things that are true and important.
Even if.
Right.
Why? Why would he do that, according to the source?
Well, the article speculates maybe it's ego, maybe it's just spontaneous. It even floats the idea that traits associated with autism, which used to be called Asperger's,
Yeah.
might make him less calculated, less able to stick to the careful scripts politicians often use.
Some maybe more likely to just blurt things out.
That's the suggestion.
Yeah.
And it contrasts him with someone like Obama, who the source calls a master liar, meaning very skilled at crafting and controlling his public image and words. Whereas Musk, even if unintentionally, might blurt out truths that disrupt the narrative the elites want to maintain. So paradoxically, his lack of calculation could be a threat to their control. Again, that's purely the source's take.
Right. So if we pull all these threads together, the core argument seems to come back to this idea of controlled discourse, mainstream politics as theater.
Exactly. It paints a picture of the political landscape as largely a managed performance,
A show put on to make us feel like there's real debate, real opposition.
while making sure the really deep criticisms, those forbidden topics we mentioned, never get serious airtime. They're kept out of the mainstream conversation.
So the safe topics generate arguments, but arguments that don't threaten the underlying system.
Right. Manageable outrage, you could say.
Yeah.
Whereas the forbidden topics, if people really started questioning them widely, the source implies that could lead to, potential systemic shifts or collapses.
Okay. So let's connect this back. For you listening, why is digging into this particular article, these specific ideas, useful? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think it offers you a different lens, maybe. A framework for questioning the public discussions you see every day.
Like asking yourself, what's not being talked about here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which topics seem to be consistently avoided or just glossed over? And it gives you one perspective, the source's perspective, on why that might be happening. Thinking about the potential motivations behind what gets attention versus what gets ignored. And it also encourages you, perhaps, to notice when things do pop up that challenge the usual narratives,
Yeah.
even if the person saying it is controversial or seems flawed.
The source seems to suggest the message might be more important than the messenger sometimes, if it breaks through that bubble.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. It pushes you to look past the simple Democrat versus Republican frame and think about the deeper power dynamics the source believes are shaping what we hear and discuss.
Analyzing the structure, not just the players.
Precisely. So maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on what we've unpacked from the source. Consider this. How often might the really significant truths or the ideas that genuinely challenge the status quo come not from the usual official voices inside the system,
Right, the ones we expect to hear from.
but maybe from these more controversial figures, complex people operating outside that managed political performance, whether they mean to or not? And if that's even sometimes true, what does that imply about how you might need to evaluate the information you come across every single day?